My name is Kate Whitfield, and I'm a principal with Alta Planning and Design. I'm a professional engineer and urban planner based in Ottawa. This video was created to help people looking for jobs in Canada to connect with CITE members who are working in the field of transportation, engineering, and planning. Without conferences and other chances to meet in person, it's important to create these opportunities to help people network in these times. We've invited people who are currently employed in the public and private sectors to come together for these informal chats. I also invited 3 job seekers to share something of interest to them. Hopefully, what comes out of these short talks is a sense of what transportation jobs are like in Canada, and for those looking for work, a better sense of what might interest them. And then a bonus element of hearing about interesting topics in transportation in Canada. And then some networking intel, some sort of job search tips. My hope is that some of the information shared here could be used by someone looking for work to better connect through LinkedIn or otherwise. Maybe something is said here that could open a door to a job. For more information on the people featured in this video, check out the YouTube page. Our hope is that new videos are released periodically over the next sort of few weeks and months. The CITE website has more information on how to get involved. So let's get going and see what the participants in today's episode have to share. Hi, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 4th episode of CITE Career Connects. This is another great episode. So as you know, we invite 3 job seekers and 3 CITE members who are currently working in the field of transportation engineering in Canada to come together for the call. So first, I'll introduce Mohammed. So Mohammed is an Assistant Vice President, Transportation Planning, Traffic Engineering at McIntosh Perry, based in Markham. He brings both experience in transportation engineering and planning to the conversation, but also business development, which is another side of our jobs. He is the chair of the CITE Training Committee, which is an important group that brings workshops and other learning opportunities to members. And he's the vice chair of Transportation Planning Committee of Mobility Council of TAC. So that's the Transportation Association of Canada. I bring that up because that's another great organization in our lives. So Mohammed's name comes up when I speak to others as someone who goes above and beyond to help break down barriers to employment to the job market, which is another reason why I wanted to invite him to the show. So I'll pass it over to you, Mohammed, for your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Kate, for introduction. I appreciate all those nice things. So let me briefly talk about some of the current projects that I'm working, and most of my projects that are in transportation planning, traffic engineering. So currently I'm working on one interesting project that it's actually parking study for city of Vaughan. It's part of the city called the village, the Kleinberg village, which is a kind of historic small village that has significant beauty, a lot of restaurants, a lot of businesses. So it's really attracting, but there are parking issues. So part of our work, in addition to all those transportation traffic studies, it's also the parking. So the interesting about this project, it's significant involvement of stakeholders, business community, a lot of surveys that we did. There is perceptions lack of parking in the village, and the village is kind of in middle of a major corridor and a lot of traffic, and it's happening in the village core. So we did significant, as I said, surveys in 3-day surveys in 3 different time. In the fall, summer, fall, and kind of like some specific event when a lot of people go and visit the area. And to do significant also, in addition to the survey, what we did is consultation. And the second consultation happened actually during the COVID, so we can had that shift from the in-person consultation to the virtual. just would like to bring the importance of multimodal and everything what we are working. It's not when we were looking for the parking, we had to look significant pedestrians activities, safety issues, complete streets, improvement of the boulevards, and potential recommendations for the solutions. So we were looking what potential can be in the phases, what city can do immediately, what city can do in the long term and short term. Through the kind of like all those recommendations and the study, what we did, it's the again how the perceptions of the business and the community is that there is lack of parking. However, when we did surveys, there is kind of like a little bit one of these when people would like to park were immediately close to the store or the restaurants, but kind of like 5 minutes of walk from the area, there is the parking available for the area. So that's kind of like one of the projects that I'm currently working, interested, because there is a lot of parking studies that the municipalities are undertaking. And again, it is mixed with other issues or other nice things what we are doing. It is we look for the transit, we look for the pedestrians, active transportation. So it's not only solution for the parkings, but bring all those in order to solve parking. We'll look how to improve the people use more active transportation going there in order to reduce parking demand and so on. So that's one of the interesting projects. I think we will talk a little bit more about the transit down the road, but that's the one of the projects that I'm currently working.
That's really great. Thank you. And I love it because multimodal and that parking side is such a huge part of a huge impact, right, on what we're talking about. So that was a really good story to share. So now our first job seeker, Alex, has a master's in environmental studies, planning from York University. So one of his roles was active transportation, public transit integration researcher for TCAT in Toronto. So that's the Center for Active Transportation, another great organization to check out with great resources. So I'm hoping to hear a little bit about his work with transit. So he's currently looking for full-time employment as a transportation or land use planner. So I'll pass it over to you, Alex, for your 2 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about this guide, which you can find on the TCAT website. And so the guide is basically a comprehensive resource particularly for municipalities or transit agencies looking to improve walking, cycling, and public transit integration. And it came out of sort of discussions that I was having with Nancy, who's the director of TCAT, about sort of the policy environment in Canada around this. And it's not to say that, the policy environment currently around active transportation, public transit integration is a bit sparse right now in Canada. And it's not to say that there aren't all sorts of wonderful examples of programming and infrastructure. I think that Canada's actually doing, especially with the Ottawa LRT, some really great work integrating cycling facilities and better walking as well into transit. But we did find there were a lot of sort of examples particularly from American cities, of some really innovative programming policy documents. So that guide consists of 3 sections. The first one is a policy guide. So if you wanted to make a policy document, what would you do? And provides a number of case studies and best practices. And then it has a very extensive section on infrastructure and programming. So we have sort of dozens of examples of infrastructure and programming and sort of things to think about. So how to maybe make a bus stop that's pedestrian friendly, but also cyclist friendly, so you're not having irritating conflict points. And the final section, we prepared audit guides. So we basically made forms to assess a cycling route to transit or a walking route to transit, designed to highlight, accessibility issues that you might encounter, but also to highlight things that are good and you would like to see replicated. That's designed to sort of be a tool to, give structure to a walk or something. And so, yeah, that's the guide, and I would recommend taking a look at it. I think it was a lot of work, and I think it's pretty cool. So, yeah.
And an organization like TCAT, for taking your schooling and then your work afterwards, and then working with an organization like that is really great to sort of pull that all together. And props to you to having something hard copy, right?
There's only
to share.
hard copies, so I have 2 of them. But you can find it online on the website.
Great. So Mark, you're next. So Mark is a transportation project leader at the City of Mississauga. Before that, he worked in the private sector, which I'll be interested to see if that comes out in sort of the tips and tricks that you give today. So Mississauga has a lot going on right now, and it's up to Mark to talk about it. But I also want to hint that Mississauga seems to have a lot of job postings up on its website. I get a lot of requests for info on them. So yeah, Mark, there's a lot going on in your community, and pass it over to you to tell us about it.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I work in the transportation planning section. So we handle a lot of the long-term, 10, 15, 20 plus year transportation planning for the city. So we're currently working on a number of different studies right now. We have one going on that is sort of a complete streets development. It's called our Changing Lanes study that one of my colleagues is leading. So we're looking at revamping the way we design our streets within the city. One of the other projects that I'm working on right now is a vehicular and transit master plan. So it's very similar to a transportation, like a traditional transportation master plan that most municipalities in Ontario undertake at one point or another. Where we look at all of the infrastructure that we're planning on doing over the next 20 years, take a look at what meets the needs and justifications according to the, the Environmental Assessment Act, and plan out, make sure it still makes sense. Are we going to be adding new projects to that? With this study, it's following our actual transportation master plan that the city of Mississauga got approved last year. And this one differed from most municipalities in Ontario in that it was very policy-based and came up with a number of action items, a number of short-term, medium-term, and long-term action items. So this study that I'm doing right now will satisfy a couple of those action items. And it's basically going to be confirming some of our road networks, as well as identifying a lot of transit priority infrastructure investments that we want to make over the next 20 years. And the goal is, coming out of our transportation master plan, the goal was to make movement in Mississauga easy and safe and very accessible for people of all ages and abilities. So that is the goal that we're, kind of aiming for with this project. It's going to be interesting. We're going to be tackling a number of different things through it, as along with the road and transit infrastructure. We're also going to be looking at grade separated, at grade railroad crossings, and if we can grade separate them, and then active transportation connections to our transit network as well.
So there's lots of transit connectivity going on today as a theme in some of these talks. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to pass it now to Nega. So Nega has graduated with a master's in transportation engineering from Carleton. She has an EIT designation with experience in construction field and research fields. So I'm looking forward to your talk, Nega, as you talk about some of the research that you've been doing at Carleton. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Kate, for your time and efforts for this initiative. Hi, everyone. I'm a master's student from Carleton University. So a master's graduate from Carleton University with a major in transportation engineering. Today, I would like to share a few details about my master's thesis. So the study was about the effect of vehicle connectivity on the safety performance of freeway acceleration speed change lanes. The title is so long because of the conditions I have considered in the study. So I have considered 16 study sites along the Highway 417 around the Ottawa. And I have collected the geometric parameters, traffic volume, collision details on the speed change lanes, particularly on the acceleration lanes where we complete the merging maneuvers. Then I have developed simulation models in MATLAB using the input parameters to represent the real world merging scenarios. Then I have considered the regular vehicles and also the connected vehicles and compared the and calculated the probability of uncomfortable merging at the merging areas of freeway acceleration lanes. And based on the probability of uncomfortable merging, I have also calculated the probable collision frequencies at the freeway merging areas using the regular vehicles and also assuming the composition as connected vehicles. And after observing the results, it was observed that there could be a decrease in the collision frequency if every vehicle is a connected vehicle and can share the updated traffic or the collision information with the surrounding vehicles. Also, I have run the sensitivity analysis to observe the variations in different parameters such as traffic volume or the length of speed change lane to see if those have any effects on the collision frequencies. I'm happy to share more details if anyone is interested in a later conversation. And right now I have a 7-month-old baby girl who can keep me busy all the day. But still, with the help of my husband and my in-laws, I have started looking for job opportunities. As Kate mentioned, I have experience in the construction industry, like supervising the construction activities and doing the estimation, coordination between the client and contractors. But after my master's from Carleton University, I'm trying to switch my field to transportation engineering. So I also registered as EIT with the PEO, and I'm currently preparing for NPPE exam coming up in November. So that also is keeping me busy. So I'm currently open for an opportunity as an EIT or an entry-level position in transportation engineering.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, yeah, the construction experience is an interesting one because it does come up a lot in the types of jobs that are out there. And then obviously connected vehicles is a popular topic. And we mentioned earlier TAC, and they put their task force together for connected autonomous shared electric. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic. Okay, our next speaker is going to be a disembodied voice calling in from Edmonton, unless we can get your camera working there. Okay. Anika is a transportation planning engineer at WSP in Edmonton. Before moving to the private sector, she did work for the city of Edmonton as a senior engineer, urban spaces, policy development, city planning. I just wanted to put the whole title because I loved all that. Urban spaces, policy, city planning. So in that job was the technical lead for Complete Streets as part of the Complete Streets design and construction standards. So Anika and I first met at a spring technical meeting at TAC. And I bring that up as another example of networking, right? Two people sitting in a room for a meeting that made the effort to walk over to each other and shake hands and say, hi, how are you? And keep in touch since then. So I'll pass it over to you for your 2 minutes, assuming that you're good there, Anika.
Thanks, Kate. I'm going to leave my video off so we don't see all the strange facial expressions I try to make while I'm trying not to freeze my camera. I worked for the city of Edmonton for a long time, about 7 years. Before that, I had worked with the province of Alberta in Alberta Transportation doing green trip related funding projects. So dealing with a lot of transit projects and evaluating municipality applications for that. And I just recently joined WSP starting in January this year. So a lot of my past experience has actually been municipal work, and a lot of it related to long-term strategic transportation planning work. There's so many projects that I've worked on, and they've all been really interesting and a joy. The one that I thought I might talk a little bit about is the park and ride guidelines that I worked on a couple years ago. It spanned about 1.5 years, and it was while I was working as a senior engineer with mobility strategies. Mobility Strategies works on long-term strategic transportation planning, and they work to implement the Transportation Master Plan. So through this project, we're looking at strategies to implement that and really support mode shift, or kind of end goals or outcomes associated with the TMP. In that project, we kind of focused on 4 core areas. There was the provision of park and ride, and transit-oriented development, the management of park and ride and customer experience. And it was a pretty comprehensive project. Like most strategy or policy-related work, as a lot of people on this call likely know, it started with the best practice and research, some data collection and analysis, a hefty amount of public engagement, and general synthesis of results. It was really interesting just because there was a ton of different inputs. And it really required some system thinking in terms of connecting all those different pieces and understanding how one area impacts another, which is kind of the most interesting thing about transportation systems and working in a city. There's so many things that are connected to one another. And the other area that was kind of interesting with this is the results weren't something that was directly based on technical analysis or something that was based only on public engagement or political outputs. It's based on a combination of all 3 of those and sort of finding a happy middle, which Mark, I'm sure you know, as part of a municipality is par for the course. That's what you got to do with most of our projects. And this project was highly political. There was a ton of councillors who were very interested in the topic and concerned about their various wards. But through it all, we worked with consultants, we worked with internal groups, including our modeling group, who did a lot of testing of scenarios to the regional travel model. We were able to develop guidelines that got approved. And through that 1.5 years, we wrote 8 to 10 council reports. But the guidelines were working, and they will be continued to be used for LRT and mass transit and regional transit planning. And so it came out with the outcome that we desired. But the reason why I wanted to share this is, even as we do our work as technical experts, we're also required to do so much more. And so it's really important to leverage those skills in different areas. Thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like the other skill, though, is is it the analogy of the marathon or like the Olympics? Like you said, how many versions in the 2 years, right? So it's like the ability to keep going and the ability to be adaptable and the ability to have stamina, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And not be crushed, have your dreams crushed in the changing transportation world. Mohammed, do you have something you want to add there? You're unmuted or?
No.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to see if, because it's just such an amazing part of, that's a great story that you told. Okay. So I'm going to pass it over for our last speaker before we get a group conversation. So Rohit is at the University of Alberta, finishing his master's degree in transportation engineering. So his work experience in traffic engineering and analysis, traffic safety, highway design, and corridor studies. So thank you for joining us today, Rohit, and we'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Kate. To start with, after my graduation in civil engineering, I started my career as a traffic engineer in India. So after working as a traffic engineer for 2 years, I started doing my master's here in University of Alberta in transportation. So here there is too much of a change. Like starting from there, we have too much of motors that are automobiles and changing like kind of we have a lot of CJB and two-wheelers there, but here too much of difference, and it is kind of a new thing to start for me. And here one thing that changed me the perspective in transportation is application of geometrics in transportation engineering. So like it has too much of applications, wide ranging from transportation planning, traffic operations, and also traffic safety. And currently I am working on implementation of mobile avid data. Using the data, we can model it to road surface temperature conditions, so that which helps us in identifying the hotspots, so that we can perform better winter road maintenance operations. like this actually involves in appending the several geographical and meteorological attributes to that location and modeling it. Once we model it using spatial interpolation techniques, we get a results which are in thermal mapping, and this thermal mapping helps us in to identify the hotspots where which require a regular monitoring or any other additional treatment, which kind of wants us to provide more insights um, about the site condition, like whether it is a icy pavement or what it is, so that we can go and address the solution, which helps in traffic safety too. Thanks.
Wonderful. And as everyone knows, I ask everyone to pick a project, one thing to do in 2 minutes. So thank you for picking that one and reminding us of ice in winter, which we don't have to think about quite yet, but eventually here in Ontario at least. Okay, so again, when we pick these, I don't know what people are going to talk about. So I just come up with some kind of conversation to get going. So I think I'm going to pick transit integration a little bit as a theme and see where we go. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Mark. Can you pick, so the idea is a typical thing at your job in your everyday related to transportation integration. So something in your work environment that you have to do, either at policy or a meeting related to transit in Mississauga. Start off there, nice and broad.
Well, I'll just start off by saying we don't have typical days. Every day is different. Yeah. So I'll start off with one of the last projects I worked on was the Lakeshore Connecting Communities project, where we were investigating not only transit, but sort of multimodal increases, improvements along the Lakeshore corridor in Mississauga. One of the big projects in Mississauga right now is the Ontario LRT project. It's under construction now, and it will be stretching from Steeles Avenue at the border of Brampton down to Port Credit GO Station, which is about 400 meters north of the Lakeshore Road corridor. So through the Lakeshore Connecting Communities project, we did a lot of work trying to best make that connection between the under construction Ontario LRT and any other type of transit we might get on Lakeshore Road. And then at the east end of the corridor is Long Branch GO Station, where the existing TTC streetcar terminates. So we had a really interesting opportunity to create sort of a linkage in the region's sort of higher road transit network. So what ended up happening is we did a sort of a hybrid corridor with bus rapid transit lanes in the east end of Lakeshore Road. And then once we hit a spot along Lakeshore Road where we didn't have enough right-of-way, we ended up having an express bus service, which took us to Port Credit, and then enhanced active transportation connections along that corridor as well. And so going through that process and continuing to go through that process, because it's not over yet, it's just the start. It showed a lot of interesting ways we can connect all the different transit networks that we're building and have built in the past in the GTA.
So that was a great storyline of a project. And when people think about typical jobs, and there's never typical, but also all the different hats. So thinking about, right, land use context, thinking about the user of the transit, what type of transit, how people access it. In there would have been probably, you said regional, different levels of government, right? Like tying into other systems. There's so much in there. Also writing and visually communicating those ideas you had to the public and to other groups, right? How to communicate a long corridor visually and the options. There's so many different jobs described in what Mark just said. Like there's the people modeling, there's the people thinking about different types of transit service, there's the people thinking about different landholders, right? Is there any more you want to add to that before I pass it on?
You're totally right. And the reason I gave that overview is because that's kind of my job, is I as the project leader for it.
Yeah.
So I'm overseeing a lot of, talking to our consultants, and they're doing a lot of the technical work, and then talking to, the general public at public meetings. And we also have, like you had mentioned at the end of there, the landowners. So at the east end of that corridor, there is a very large property that's under development. And so having those conversations with them and how we sort of all tie in with their plans as well.
Absolutely. And then like a geometric design example would be, with transit for us, would be how to design a bus stop next to a cycle track, next to a sidewalk.
Yeah.
Right? It's not it is policy, but it's widths, material selection, where's the sign, what is the pavement marking, what is the surface? I mean, that would be a transit. Another example in a typical job is designing bus stops and different types of treatments. Annika, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to ask the question. So with a lot of the, the work that we do is long-term transportation planning, and we're in this huge, let's say, disruptive change going on right now. How has that project considered a change into like automated vehicles or different technology as things come up? Or is that part of the consideration?
So we didn't explicitly include that in there, but one of the, I guess, goals was to have sort of a flexible plan. So the interim was a bus rapid transit service. The future, the potential future long-term plan, which was outside of our study, was an extension of the TTC streetcar into Mississauga. Now, once you start getting automated vehicles, maybe a bus system would continue to work really well in the future, because now you're potentially have driverless vehicle, like transit shuttles along that corridor that can maybe operate with shorter headways and have that, increased capacity. Then you don't necessarily need the rail service. So yeah, back to your question, it wasn't explicitly, but we were thinking about it through the design of the project and making sure that we had that flexible solution that we can kind of switch gears in the future if need be.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Mohammed, do you want to add in there?
Yeah, I would like to add, I mean, I didn't talk about kind of like my project, but just to link to the transit, I'm working on one parking study, which again, it's how to link those two, where we are trying to solve or address a parking issue. Kind of like study started with perception. There is a lack of parking in the community. But the importance of transit again, so you cannot look only one issue like parking. So we are trying to improve transit to the area, to bring more visitors to the area by using transit in order to address some of the parking demands. So how the both are linked, and these days it's in general everything works together. Those multimodal. Wherever you have transit, you have to look, like Kate said, for active transportation. So it gets to the point these days that really, finally, we are not looking anymore only cars. We are looking at transit connectivity, transit improvement. On the same way, we are linking active transportation, connectivity, and safety. So it's really important. When many of these projects, you really cannot anymore just talk about one thing, which is finally good. So one traffic study or one study, whatever you call it, in my case, parking study, but in addition to parking, we look at everything, active transportation, safety, transit, so many different things in order to just to solve one, let's call it, parking issue. So the transit is finally here, and in particularly in Toronto area, is a lot of transit projects, initiatives, and it is amazing to see how we are moving with those BRTs across the region, and slowly with transit and so on. So it is an exciting time, and transit is important.
Absolutely. And we heard the word complete streets a couple times, both when Alex was talking and Mark and Annika. And we think about what is a good transit street, but we also think about like just moving buses through if it's a bus, right? Like having the kind of what transit priority measures can be in place to support that. And it's a really hot topic. Anyone else want to jump in here, or I can switch us over to the career tip? Alex, do you want to add something?
Or I mean, maybe if we're on the subject of bus rapid transit and suburbs, but yeah, it's sort of interesting to see to what an extent there's sort of an expectation of changing land use, I think, around transit in Toronto. Like I drove through Newmarket yesterday along Davis Drive, which I don't know if anyone's been there, but it's kind of a very odd place because it's like a 3 kilometer long, you know, incredible piece of bus rapid transit infrastructure, but there didn't seem to be any buses. There didn't seem to be anybody taking the bus, and then also you have a land use pattern that doesn't really support bus rapid transit right now. And I think it's sort of an interesting thing to watch all these, you know, particularly Mississauga and York region, sort of attempt to urbanize in large way through public transit. I think it's sort of something that maybe 25 years we'll see how successful it is, but it's sort of this, you know, very intertwined land use and transit project across the region.
That's why we need to get you a job out of planning school so you can help us with land use patterns around stations.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. I do have a PhD topic ready in case that comes up. I don't know if that's ever gonna happen.
In Ottawa, they've upzoned around stations, so what you're allowed as a minimum is no longer, right? Like they're trying to set the bar, so around a station is not a parking lot. It's still the case today because the buildings have to be developed, but it certainly is a challenge, right? And as we also, you think of transit systems and we think of changing jobs, as we're probably all sitting at home right now, close to it. It's definitely something to watch, but more and more projects, well, we've always used the words transportation and land use together, but you're seeing more and more examples of solid projects that like figure out how to include the policy to make. I see Annika, you've unmuted, so that's my signal that you have something profound to say.
I'm not sure if it's profound so much as an observation, but I don't think it's not a new thing for sure. I know for the city of Edmonton, there's a station here called Century Park that's associated with the LRT, and it's been identified for TOD development for over 10 years. And it's only now that it's really starting to form into something. And I think part of the difficulty and part of the interest, I guess, for our kind of profession is figuring out those different pieces to push on to make that happen. It's not necessarily one thing. Like there's land use, there's transportation, there's the actual built form, there's incentives. There's so many different pieces. And I'd say like that's also something Edmonton is struggling with right now. Like one of the big pushes that they have through the city plan is the development of a series of nodes and corridors that's anchored by mass transit. And part of that means intensification in certain locations and a change in the desires or marketability of these different locations. And so I think it's a really interesting time to be around and to really think about how to fit a number of different pieces together to come to a solution for some of these elements.
Yeah, and how to not be on a plan for a million years, right? Not just on a drawing on a piece of paper, but in reality. So we're going to shift a little bit to sort of a career tip, so we get this conversation also going. We got Rohit and Naga here too to talk about. So the topic I picked was in-person networking. I know it might be strange as there's limited opportunities, but it's a fun topic. and I didn't do this on purpose, this is a fluke, but I met Mohammed at a workshop where we met in person. I met Mark at a talk he gave where I walked up to him after he spoke and said, hello, my name is Kate. And I met Annika at a technical meeting at TAC. Now, you could also say that's my personality, but there's a tip in there. Like when I go to an event, I speak to people. I don't just sit with the people that I know, that I came with, my colleagues. I meet people, and it does take sometimes confidence just to walk up and say hello. And I'm often asked, what do you say when you walk up? And I know it's easy to say just hello, but and obviously you just attended someone's talk in some cases, so that gives you something to talk about. But I'll pass this around, or Nega, you've unmuted, so why don't you go actually first with your question or story?
I'm excited for the tip of the day because I always wonder, like I don't have problem approaching people in an event. I can approach and say hello and I'm doing this project or I'm studying at university or something. But after starting the conversation, I feel it's difficult to continue the conversation to make a mark. So I'm just
fair enough.
trying to advise or open for the suggestion how to continue for long enough so that they can remember us the next time.
Okay, I love it. So first hurdle is actually walking up, and that is the challenge, first challenge. Second thing is sometimes the hello and nice to meet you, thank you can be enough, and then it can be a LinkedIn message afterwards or an email. Because, and I know it's a different market, but honestly, my first job, I met someone at a firm. They said jobs are coming, and I walked away, and I still got rejected. But then they called 6 months later because they needed somebody because they won a big project, and I happened to have my email on the top of the pile, and none of my friends who also were in that group bothered to send the resume after the meeting. So that little chance I took and it got rejected turned into an opportunity because they had it on file. Now that's private sector, but it can be, it can build, right? It doesn't have to be, you didn't have to nail it on that one little meeting, right? And it's also the art of hello, nice to meet you, and walking away, and then a follow-up. Mark or anyone want to, Mohammed's unmuting, so you go next.
Sure, I will. Let's assume, I mean, networking for the people who are looking for work. So I think that's for us that already have, let's assume, job. It's networking. It's okay. We already have, but it's really important if you in person in this case. Use that opportunity. So once you're already there in let's say in some event, so use that opportunity as much as possible to, if you are looking for a job, to tell that you are looking for a job. And conversation, it's your opportunity to pretty much provide a little bit about background like we did here, and start conversation. What's your interest? And ask about interesting project that person has to share with you, and try to expand, and don't try to get involved or talk to as much as possible. As I said during that event, go from try to have conversation with more people. And again, don't be afraid or to tell I'm looking for work. I just graduated or looking for work, was working on this or that, and have some experience somewhere else, and look for the kind of like it's easy these days to the kind of exchange. People are literally these days don't exchange business cards anymore. They just connect you right away. Can I connect you on the LinkedIn? And keep in touch and follow up. So it's really important that you use opportunity and that you really tell what you're looking for job. It's don't be afraid to tell that. So that's kind of like my advice, and follow up. So
yeah, and with that, maybe Mohammed, it would be also if instead of just saying I need an engineering job or even a transportation job, if you can go one further with the type, right? That helps too. But also with you did it in the beginning, right? You said you're moving on from construction, but in honesty, you might need to do the construction job next to then move on. But sort of some knowledge of what the job might be like. Mark, I see you've unmuted, so do you have a tip?
Not so much a tip, as I'm terrible at networking. But I'd like to kind of echo what Mohammed said. Showing an interest in maybe asking about the other person's work and what they're into and what they're kind of passionate about at the moment. Because while you are looking for a job, it is kind of like a regular conversation with anyone else as well. People like talking about themselves. So if you show an interest in them, that they'll look a little bit more favorably in my experience at that.
Adding on that would be, honestly, ask a question in the talk. Put up your hand, say your name, ask a question. Or one time, I volunteered to be the moderator. They needed someone in the crowd, and I knew that would make me more memorable if I participated. This was a long time ago, but that just those little things, right? Like to try and use the opportunity to meet people. Alex, you've unmuted.
Sure. Yeah, just like maybe as someone who's maybe had feels like more than my fair share of coffees with people over the years. I feel like if you meet people at events, it is a really great opportunity to ask them if you want to get a coffee or something like that, or get lunch. And I think of like all the people who have helped you over my job search, and not a single person's ever said no. And I've been really sort of amazed how willing a lot of people are to help you if you actually ask them, and willing to spend time with you, and especially like coaching you for jobs. I've been kind of amazed by how much help some people have given me. So I would just use events as like, yeah, just ask people for a coffee then. It feels often a good idea.
And Rohit, you have a question?
Yes, like considering in a meeting, like I go to a person and ask him, I say hello, hi, how are you, and do you have a time to chat and all. So considering all that, at that moment, like how long it would be good to have a meeting with them? Like for example, like for a person like me, I keep on asking questions like, how is it, like what is it, and how can this be done? And so how can I know the threshold, like to what limit I can ask and how long I can to wait? I don't know exactly where to stop. So yeah.
I love it. Mohammed, you go for it.
Yeah, I kind of like, I mean, I had those concerns, but I just can tell you, just be yourself. Just let it kind of like a normal conversation. It's really important that don't be stressed, but show the passion that you really like, whatever you like. Is it transportation planning? Is it traffic engineering? And do your the best to start conversation. And pick on something, let's say if in that event that was something around presented, if you can pick on that conversation, that presentation, or something that you can show interest. And it's also, each of us are different. There is no kind of like really formula for something and situation. But just be yourself, and it is event, and try to learn as much as possible. But again, some people really looking for job. It's important to show the passion that you really want the job, and ask what is the kind of like typically how to get in that organization, or in that case entry level, or what you can bring, or what are some kind of like tips. So, but be yourself and enjoy conversation. It doesn't have to be written question. It cannot be in many situations. It's not one-to-one person. There is a group of people around you. Sometimes you are around table with people at lunch, or so conversation is ongoing, and just relax and do your best.
Naga, do you have one?
Yeah, so after the conversation, if I want to follow up through LinkedIn message or through an email, so do I just say like, hello, we have met at that event and that I am looking for these roles. So do I attach a resume in that email, or do I attach a CV or resume in the another email or another message following up that email?
I think it's the passing on of your resume is helpful because then it's on file. That was my little comment earlier. It was because my resume was on file that I got called for a follow-up job. But I still always give the tip, when you write somebody, you only really have a short paragraph to get their attention, right? So we met at this event. I just want to take this chance to follow up and provide you with my resume. I really appreciate it. And if you can do a little bit of what your interest is, that's great. But sometimes I've received 6, 7, 8 paragraphs, and I'm not making it down to the 8th, right? So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of that. And Rohit, there's a little bit of reading the response from somebody too, right? Because part of you're also selling your ability for these social interactions a little bit. So, you can tell when you've got a good thing going on a back and forth exchange and when it's time to sort of call it. But I think back to Alex's point, in these times, if someone offers you help, you take it. And, there's something in there. A lot of people apologize. They say to me, "Oh, I'm too busy. I'm sorry." And I say, "Fine, but that's your choice. Like I've offered, that's cool." I get that people have a lot of demands too, family and otherwise. But you can see that connection, and you can get a sense of it. Annika, you want to say anything here?
Oh, I was just going to say, similar kind of to what Mark had mentioned, I also was very terrified of networking before I actually started doing it. And the more often you do it, the more often you talk to people, the easier it gets. But it's really important, I think, to form a bit of a personal connection. Like if all you talk about is work or the type of work, you only remember so many facts. It's when you make an actual personal connection that people are willing to stick their neck out for you. So it's important to really get to know people as well as you're starting to make connections with certain groups. And the other thing I was going to mention is I always, if I've met with someone at a conference, I always prefer a follow-up meeting. So if it's going to be a coffee or just a chat, whatever it is, I'd say reaching out and being very clear about your intentions in terms of, I want to learn about your job, or I want to learn about your company, or I'm looking for this position. Whatever it is, but be clear about your intentions and set a time limit. Rohit, you had mentioned in terms of like worrying about going too far. If you set up a half an hour coffee, make it a half an hour coffee and try to use that as a bit of a way to manage your time and your questions.
And if we're in a world of meeting each other, I still also recommend pen and paper, because I've had too many where it looks like someone's texting when they're making notes. So I don't know if that's getting used to that, but it looks like they're texting during our call. And if I'm giving you half an hour, you don't need your phone in that time. A couple other fun ones would just be like going to an event, don't sit with your office. If you're in that kind of environment, don't sit with the people you came with. And sincerity, right? Everything doesn't have to be a transaction. And I can tell when someone's looking over my shoulder for a better person to talk to, right? Then I get out of that conversation. So that's back to Annika's sincere comment about something, a real connection. Like, you put yourself out there, enjoy it, be a part of it, and you see where those conversations take you. And not everyone will equal a valuable connection for your future, but it's about making an effort to speak to people. But you can definitely tell when it's not sincere or someone's not interested, then you get out. You don't have to be in that conversation. So I know in person is hard when we think right now, but I noticed a few conferences starting to offer 2 rates, one for in person and one for virtual. I also think about different ways people network. It's really like, this is part why this is here, right? But it's the same premise of reaching out and making connection. And Alex, you've unmuted, so do you want to add in something there too?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, we're sort of talking a lot about events here, but there aren't really any events going on right now, and I wonder I think I'm supposed to speak at a conference in a little bit, but I don't really know if it's happening, and I don't think it's happening in person. But it sort of like leads me to wonder, should we or have people heard of any, I guess, attempts to maybe bring people who are in on a webinar or something to actually connect? Like, I would think that might be a really interesting opportunity to even almost, if you go to a webinar, get paired with people, just because it's so hard to meet people in person right now. I don't know if anyone's heard of anything like that, because it seems very likely that this might be the way things are for a little bit longer. What are your thoughts on that?
So YPT Toronto is doing Meet the Managers, where there's a talk and then there's breakout rooms to help people connect in smaller groups. They're going to try that. So that's one way. The Ontario Traffic Council tried 3 half-day of conferences with almost halls to meet in, virtual groups to meet in, outside of talks. So it would be like this, like your body language is limited to the screen face, right? and the mute button to have a networking. I don't know, Annika, at West, are you seeing anything other in terms of sort of virtual helping to create in-person moments, equivalent moments?
There's a lot of conferences that are going on, a lot of virtual conferences. But in terms of actual networking events, I feel like over the last 6 months or so, professional organizations have been scrambling a bit in terms of finding out the best events that'll work out and the best software that would support it. And they're starting to figure it out now. So I think like over the next 6 months, there'll be more opportunities to connect with people in different ways. So I'd say like keep an eye open would be one of them. But the other piece is if you're comfortable with it, even just searching up specific people or jobs or positions through LinkedIn and then trying to connect with them through a video chat, I think is perfectly acceptable. I've had a number of those already too, where people just want to find out a little bit more about you, and most people are equipped with some kind of video conferencing software to be able to have those calls. So that's an option too.
Yeah, and we have to be careful with the conference one because someone has to pay for that too, right? But those other events that I mentioned are low cost. So then we'll just, like, as we wrap up, the other points would just be when I do go to an event, I look up the speaker beforehand, right? And maybe connect with people before I go, which increases the chances of maybe meeting somebody there, maybe, if it makes sense, right? It's back to sincerity, it has to make sense. But it's just that general idea of, those events are a great way, whether in person or virtual, to meet people and finding ways to sort of extend that. So as we wrap up here, Mohammed, do you have one more tip?
Yeah, I just would like to say at local level, if you can try, like Kate said, maybe it's you cannot go to conference or whatever, try to be involved in local level. It's more easier. So you may have those opportunities like during lunchtime or at evening, some of these events. So that's opportunity when you can or get involved in some asking for volunteering or the networking at that level. So use every opportunity to get in and follow up. Once you get in touch, like Kay said, you will pretty much soon see who is really happy to help you. It's again up to you to use that and follow up with that person and tell where you are through each stage. If somebody offered to help you, again, if you don't take initiative, it's pretty much we are busy or whatever. So once somebody offered to help you, try to follow up and provide update and just keep going.
So it seems like the best way to end is, and it's not for everybody, but CITE has this $30 under 30 membership. And then obviously CITE is a good networking place, hence this program. But also, I mean, NAGA, there's the National Capital Chapter, right, is very active. Obviously, Toronto has numerous agencies for volunteerism and connection. And then I keep having people from Alberta on this, so I'm sure there's some strong groups there too, in Edmonton and Calgary, for instance. So thank you everybody for joining. Annika, I'm sorry we didn't get to see your face, but awesome contribution. Nice seeing you. It was a way of you and I seeing each other. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today.